Hello, welcome back to Learn Economia. Today we are going to discuss the part 7 of the Introductory Microeconomics chapter 2, Theory of Consumer Behavior. Let's see more about the theory of consumer behavior here. So I'll be providing the links of part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5 and part 6 in the description box of the theory of consumer behavior. So let's get started and see how is the theory of consumer behavior progressing. Now it is the time to see the optimal choice of the consumer. So whenever we have a consumer, we know that a consumer will be having a budget. And this budget is something that shows the income of the consumer, isn't it? So this is what we have already discussed. So this budget set will show all the combinations of commodities which are available to the consumer. So that means whenever you consider a budget set, the budget set will show all the bundles which are available to the consumer. The bundles available to the consumer are shown by the budget set. So the consumer would be able to choose the consumption bundle from the budget set. But we need to ask the question, on what basis would I be choosing a consumption bundle from the different bundles that are available to the consumer? So here we need to assume that the consumer will be choosing consumption bundle on the basis of his taste as well as preferences over the bundles which are given in his budget set. So here the role of taste and preference matters. Let's see more about this. Again, we need to assume that the consumer has a well-defined preference over set of all possible bundles. So if you have something like this, you measure two goods here, you have to see that if this is the budget line, you have to see if you are staying in this particular budget line, this shows all the possible combinations of two goods which makes the consumer spend his entire income. Okay, so that means you can compare two different points on the budget line like A and B. This point A show a bundle of two commodity good X and good Y. Certain combination of good X and certain combination of good Y would be there in point A, or this is what is indicated by combination A. Again, when it comes to combination B, you will be having certain other combination of good X and certain other combination of good Y, isn't it? So you can go for a comparison of the two bundles, and between any two bundles, you could see that this person, the consumer, would be preferring one to the other. Either he will be preferring A to B, or else he will be preferring B to A, or else we could see that the consumer is indifferent between bundle A and B. So these are the possibilities that we have. Now let's see the equality of the marginal rate of substitution and the ratio of prices. What is the role of this equality when it comes to the consumption behavior? This is something that has to do with the optimum bundle of the consumer, and this is something located at the point where your budget line is tangent to the indifference curve. So this is your budget line and this is the indifference curve that you have, and at this point you can have your IC is tangent to budget line. So if the bezel line is tangent to an IC at a particular point, what does it shows is that here the slope of the value of the slope of your indifference curve. What is the slope of IC? Slope of IC is indicated by MRS. And what is MRS? The marginal rate of substitution between two goods. Okay. So the slope of IC at this point would be equal to the slope of your bezel line. And what is slope of bezel line? Slope of bezel line is given by the price ratios. Price ratio, that is equal to Px by Py, isn't it? So here you have MRS XY. Since we are measuring commodity X and commodity Y along the X and Y axes respectively. So you do have an equality of these two things whenever you have a point of tangency between IC and bezel line. At this point, MRS XY would be equal to Px by Py. So here the slope of IC is something, or the MRS. This is what shows the rate at which consumers is willing to substitute one good for the other. So it shows willingness of consumer to substitute one good for the other. So the willingness part is important here. Whether the consumer is willing, that is the question here. Okay, the rate at which he is willing to substitute this good X for good Y or good Y for good X. This is what is shown by the MRS. Now moving to the bezel line, it shows the rate at which the consumer is able to substitute. So here comes the role of ability. Okay, so whenever MRS is equal to price ratio, here you could see that your willingness to substitute would be equal to ability to substitute. Okay, so this is shown by the optimum point. Optimum point. So whenever the rate at which the consumer is willing to substitute one good for the other is same as the rate at which the consumer is able to substitute one good for the other, this is something which shows the optimum point. And let's see a point that is not optimum. So here just assume that your MRS, this is 2. Okay, and suppose that the two goods that we have, so these have same price. That is the next assumption that we have. So here in our previous example we were using mangoes and banana. If you remember, on the y-axis we were taking mango or good Y, and here in the case of good X we are considering banana. Okay, so here we are considering that since the MRS is 2, the consumer is willing to give up 2 mangoes to get 1 banana. Okay, but when it comes to the market, what actually could you have is a situation where the consumer can buy an extra banana if we give just 1 mango. So here what happens is that if a consumer buys an extra banana, this person will be having more of both banana and mango compared to the bundle which was represented by a point that we have already considered. So he would be moving to the preferred bundle. Always consumer will be having a preference. Okay. So we could see that if at all the MRS is greater than the price ratio, this you consider as a non-optimal point. Non-optimal point. Also, if the MRS, if it is less than the price ratio, you consider this point too as a non-optimal point. These are not optimum points. Okay. So only if you have MRS equal to price ratio, you call this situation as something optimum. So here we assume a situation that the consumers are rational, and by rationality what we mean is that this person is able to know what is good for him and what is bad for him if he is given a situation. So he will be trying to attain his level best. So what is it? He is a utility maximizing agent. Maximizing agent. That is what we assume. Okay. So here not only does a consumer will be having some well-defined preferences over the available bundles, also he will be acting as per his preference. So by taking his taste and preference into consideration, he will be acting as per that. And from bundles which are already available to the consumer, since we are dealing with the case of a rational consumer, he would always choose that particular bundle which gives him the maximum utility or the maximum satisfaction. So when it comes to a rational consumer's problem, a person or a consumer who wishes to maximize his utility from consuming the commodities, this person will be moving to a point on the highest possible IC. So this is very important. Why? Because we know that when you move to a higher IC, this will be increasing your satisfaction level. Increasing satisfaction, isn't it? So if at all you do have a point like that, where can it be located? That is what we are going to see now. I told you that the optimum point would be something where you can have the equality between or the tangency point. This would be the tangency point of your highest possible IC with the given budget. With the given budget line. Okay. So if you are considering a point below this, so this is the optimum point. If you are considering any point somewhere here, this is not optimum. and if you are considering some point somewhere here, this is something unattainable. Why? Because you don't have your income, you don't have that much of income source to buy more quantities of the commodities to get more satisfaction. Okay, so this is something that will happen, like if you compare some points which lie here with here, this point, you could see that compared to a point that lie below the budget line, that means a point somewhere which lies somewhere here, let it be point B. Okay, compared to point B, and let it be point A, compared to point B, some point on the budget line, that is this point A, this contains at least more of at least one of the good. Let it be not the equilibrium point, let it be some point like C here. So if you compare B and C, you are comparing B and C. Okay, here you could see that B gives a situation where less is purchased. So, but when you take the case of C, in the case of C, you could see that this contains more of at least one good. So, it contains more of at least one good. It can be X or Y and no less of the other. Okay. So, for the very same reason, given a situation to choose from B and C, a consumer who is rational will always choose C because it contains more of at least one of the goods and not less than the other commodity. So this would be the preferred bundle by the consumer, and this preference would also be monotonic. And what is monotonic? Monotonic shows that more is preferred to less. Preferred to less. Okay, so here what happens? In the case of C, this gives the consumer more goods, more of at least one good and no less of the other, no less of the other. Okay, so given a choice between B and C, consumer will also always choose C only. Now, what about some points which is above the budget line? If you are given a budget line like this again, the two goods X and Y, what is a point like D which lies outside the budget line? So this is something you cannot purchase with your available budget. Point above the budget line are not available to you, okay, to you with your given budget. Given budget. Okay. So always we have to consider the point of tangency. The optimum point is always the point of tangency between budget line and highest possible IC. Possible IC, not MC, IC. So it means indifference curve. In order to see why that is the situation, we have to consider any point on budget line other than the point where it touches your IC. So these such points are considered to be inferior points, which will not be the optimum point of the consumer. Okay. So here we can see such points. If you look at the figure, you could see that the budget line is seen here. This is the budget line, and you have your indifference curve. And at this point, the consumer is going for a combination of two commodities. This is a combination. So with respect to x1 commodity or commodity which you measure along the x-axis, the consumer is consuming x1 star. And regarding that particular commodity which is measured along the y-axis, the consumer is consuming x2 star. So his bundle consists of x1 star and x2 star. So this is the optimum bundle. Optimum. Why? Because you could see that blue line is IC1, black line is IC2 and grey line is IC3. And we know that with higher IC, satisfaction increases. So if you move to a higher IC, you have increased satisfaction. When you shift to a higher IC, you have increased satisfaction. So you could see that the budget line is touching your IC1 at 2 points, isn't it? At these 2 points, your budget line is touching your IC1. But these are not the tangency point where the slope of these are equal. So these are just the intersection point. And also we know that when it comes to optimum points, we are looking at the tangency point of your budget line with the highest attainable IC. See, your IC2 is the highest attainable IC here compared to IC1. IC1 gives you less satisfaction. This is something which compared to IC2, compared to the satisfaction that you get from IC2, isn't it? So this is the optimum point. Here the budget line is tangent to the black colored IC or your IC2, and at this particular point let it be the equilibrium point or E. So here the IC is just touching the budget line given the consumer's preference and budget set, isn't it? So the bundles on the IC curves above this, like these points, the bundles that you can have on IC3, this is something that is not affordable to consumer with the given budget. All the points here, 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 these are non-affordable with the given budget. Now coming to the points on IC which is below the point of tangency, you could see that these are inferior points. Why inferior points? Because the consumer has got more income so as to get higher satisfaction by consuming more quantities of both banana and mangoes. And at any other point on the bezel line, on a lower IC curve, so these points are inferior to combination x1 star x2 star, and that is why you consider this as the optimum bundle. Okay, so any point on the bezel line on a lower IC are inferior to this. So that is all about today. I request you to like, share and subscribe to this channel for more videos. You can also be a part of my Telegram channel and Telegram group. You can discuss your doubts there. I'll be providing the link of the very same in the description box. Also, you can download the Learn Economy app. For that also, I'll be providing the link in the description box. That's it. Thank you for watching and kindly like, share and subscribe to this channel for more videos.